Welcome, everybody, to the very first segment of the EQ economy, where we talk about disrupting the current economic system with emotional intelligence and intrinsic human need. I'm going to be your host, Donnie Hall, and I'm extremely excited to have joining us today none other than the visionary himself, Ed Kang. Ed Kang is a startup co-founder, EQ coach, organization development consultant, speaker, and self-proclaimed pirate with a portfolio career. With the current state of the world, Ed has brought to the forefront a generative idea which challenges much of how we think and operate. So with no further ado, I'll bring Ed into the picture. Ed, my friend, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk EQ economy, man. What is it? Fill us in.
EQ economy. Well, this was an idea that was really percolating with a group of us entrepreneurs and who practice emotional intelligence. So, we're training teachers to use emotional intelligence, but then also people to become tutors in emotional intelligence, coaches, consultants, and then just general entrepreneurs in terms of how do we build our business. And so we're talking about, so there's two concepts to the EQ economy. The first is there's research out there, if you look it up, from Talent Smart and other places, that people with high emotional intelligence make, on average, $29,000 more per year than their lower emotional intelligence counterparts. And so emotional intelligence, we define emotional intelligence as how intelligent you are about your emotions, as well as how you use those emotions to unlock your intelligence. So if that's the case, then the statistic has been shown making an average of $29,000 more per year. And they've even measured it down to every point increase in emotional intelligence. That's an additional $1,300 a month in salary, proven in every industry, every region around the world. So that leads us to believe, okay, if we have higher emotional intelligence, we'll make more money. So there's the economy side, and that has a major impact on personal financial situation, economics, etc. Then what if we could create a system, an economic system that reflects emotional intelligence, values such as empathy, a self-awareness, community, being able to resolve conflict, competitive dynamics using emotional intelligence? What would that look like if we actually created a system where we could do business with each other in using emotional intelligence and reflecting human values? The possibilities of that's what the EQ economy is all about, and it's very pertinent today with what we just went through in 2020.
So what I'm hearing, Ed, is we're looking to change up how we currently operate and really bring in the human values aspect and really look at how we can incorporate emotional intelligence on a higher level to make people more successful to a degree in their own definition of success and to live a more fruitful life.
Well, think about it this way. If you look at what's happening economically, what we went through, and then politically, just look at the unrest in the world. People are disenfranchised with the current economic system and economies and politics, leadership and corporations. Are we a democracy? Are we a meritocracy? Or are we a corporatocracy? So a lot of people they're kind of raging against the machine right now. And so you see a lot of unrest around the world. But now take that, so that's happening on a grand macro scale. Now take that to a micro scale. I'm talking to people, clients all the time, where they're just dealing with personal issues when it comes down to, their emotional centeredness, their well-being, being able to manage their mental health as they're struggling through work or they're locked down, they can't do the same things. Quite frankly, I had a personal meltdown a couple of nights ago where I was trying to record some content and do some work, but I had my family, we're all cooped up together. I don't have an office in my home anymore because everybody's had to have their own separate rooms. And so I'm in my bedroom right now. I know I got a fancy virtual background, to hide it, but that takes a toll. So what's the emotional intelligence and how is that affecting my work? How are my emotions affecting my work as I go through this? And then how does that go into the general system where, huge groups of people, countries, are struggling. And it's time to think about it. So it's not just individual success. It's about how do we address a system, the systemic issues that we are experiencing when we're not politicians. I'm not the president of anything. I'm not in terms of world government leadership. I'm not in those positions, but how do we create that change and then start to create ripples of change and affect people's lives individually? But then eventually that's just going to, everything's going to rise up and affect cities, communities, just entire societies overall.
So I think the current state, obviously, I think it's just exacerbated the need for this change, because we've been living in a system like this for decades now. It's just really come to a head because of what's going on with COVID, the restrictions. How does the actual EQ economy that you speak of really change the dynamic from, the figureheads at the very top of the world, the 1% owning everything and controlling everything, to something where, I'm not going to say this, where we get to live more free?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. And that's a question that people who are much smarter than I am have been trying to figure out for decades, dare I say centuries. And the issue is that human nature is human nature. So no matter how scientifically advanced that you get, it's just going to get to the point where in any type of economy where you use creativity, or people can make their own decisions, where they have freedom, the autonomy to do so with different sets of value systems. So for example, you can give the exact same opportunity and education to two different children, and the way they grew up, where they grew up, and the types of parents they have will determine greatly what they do with those opportunities. So you're always going to, no matter how much of an equal start you give everybody, people are going to come out with different types of outcomes. So the question has always been, creating wealth is not the issue. We've seen it. People, even in this pandemic right now, there are people, the rich are getting richer, and everything in between. So creating wealth is not the issue. It's how do we redistribute wealth? And that's where the battle is. And for me, instead of trying to create some type of system of taxes, or go out there and say, let's tax the rich and, all that stuff. I get it. I understand where people are coming from. And yes, there's so much abuse, and I've seen it myself. I've experienced it at, the higher levels, let's say the top 1%. But for me, the best way to do it is to change the value system. So if we can get CEOs, we can get entrepreneurs, we can get the next Mark Zuckerbergs, the next Elon Musks, the next people who are going to be creating, your Instagrams and your Facebooks and what have you, with the values, having high emotional intelligence and having those values, well, then we're going to trust that they will then participate in the redistribution of wealth, or make decisions that have more empathy. Let's just take empathy for one example. Imagine someone sitting on top of $1 billion company who has a change of heart and develops tremendous empathy and compassion for the people working for them. Well, instead of, let's say, going in doing philanthropic things, which is kind of the vogue thing to do, what if they turn that and said, I'm just going to pay everybody more, or I'm going to give people more time off, or different things like that, and see it's a grand human experiment of what's happening. And so that's how we sort of shuffle the deck, if you will. And I think people are definitely open to that right now, compared to what they were before. And so it's a complex problem, and it's easy to reduce it. You can be very reductive and say it's the one thing, these people are oppressors, or, education is the one thing. It's not. And if you look at complex human systems and that theory, you can cut it every single which way and say there are thousands of factors. So it's going to require a complex system to address this complex problem.
It sounds complex.
It is.
but I appreciate the fact that you're willing to take it on and bring these ideas to the table and really actually, I know I'm fortunate enough to be standing beside you to see it put into practice. Before I get into that, I'm really curious, like what would be the biggest objection from the so-called 1% who do control it, who like, what's stopping them from redistributing that wealth? What's stopping them from seeing the other side of the coin?
Sure. Long time ago, I had an opportunity to go and work for a very wealthy individual, the 1%er, if you will. And I asked my mentor and I said, what's the reason? What do you think? You think I should do it? And he said, yes. And I said, well, give me a good reason. And he said to me, rich people need love too. And that really hit me and made me think about it. You have to understand that everybody has, so you've got your behaviors on the surface. So it's like, the iceberg. And then underneath are the values. But then, so someone might value money or amassing power or different things like that. But underneath those values are your social dynamics and your psychodynamics, your conditioning. And so the people who've got wealth, there's a reason they have that wealth. They have a complex emotional system going on underneath that's driving their values and then their behaviors and which way they spend their money or run their companies. It's very easy to attack the behaviors. Oh, look, I remember having a conversation the other day and one of my colleagues was saying, I don't want to become that person who builds a really big company and sits on the beach. And I said, well, what's the point of, developing a company if you can't enjoy sitting on the beach? And this individual was telling me their reflections and thinking about, well, what would all the employees say? I don't want to become that person. And I said, wow, there's a complex emotional system that's driving that. And so we can't just attack the behaviors. We can't just say, oh, this company leader X is bad because they spend their billions in this way or their millions, what have you, no matter which amount. And so there is going to be an emotional reaction. And this is where we can have empathy too and develop instead of creating something where they sense that they have to protect themselves, say, hey, one of our colleagues, Rob, he said, how can we prove that giving more will get you more? Type thing, right? But there's going to be a resistance. There's a fear to that. And I think that's what a lot of people are objecting to. They're experiencing these objections. For example, one of my heroes, Ricardo Semler, said that if you feel like you have to give back, you've probably taken too much. I'm paraphrasing. I probably butchered that quote. And someone like me, I look at that and I'm like, wow, that's really compelling. Other people I've seen just say, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Well, there's a complex emotional reaction there. Some people are saying, you're saying if I work so hard and do this and, do that, and I want to give back, then I've taken too much. Well, when you're in extreme cases, there is an argument for that. But at the same time, we can understand the individual who's just scraping by and who wants to do that. And so people are going to have emotional reactions, and we have to get past the surface behaviors and the values just underneath the surface and get to the heart of the matter and say, what's stopping people from redistributing wealth? What's stopping people from being more generous, paying higher wages, different things like that? What is happening there? And I think that's where we can do some heavy lifting and really get some leverage and break open some opportunities.
Wow. You touched on something, and I'm going to come back to it, but I want to say this because it became so very apparent just in you saying this. Is I've heard a number of times people say, we need to live with abundance. We need to live with abundance. And I hear that often coming from people who have lots. And the fact of the matter is, I know a lot of people who don't have a lot, and they do actually live with abundance. They live with abundance from their heart, and they give a lot. But the people who I hear saying it don't. Like they may live with this idea of abundance, but they don't do, as you said, give to get more. And so I'm curious, like this concept of give to get more, where did it come from, and how does it truly apply to who we are as humans and building an EQ economy?
Well, let's talk about abundance, for a second. And we can't ignore that it's really trendy to say certain things. So you have a certain amount of virtue signaling that happens where we live in these echo chambers in social media. And so we're going to say things such as live with abundance, right? People go out and talk about the law of attraction, right? And, if you believe in it and you can see it and you act it, you're going to attract it to yourself and what have you. And, I'm not going to take away from, the belief systems, and, we're not here for that. We want to analyze and understand, okay, how does that affect people in different ways? And so a lot of times people will talk about abundance because they want to be happy. I hear lots of people talk all the time. I just want to be happy. My 15-year-old son asks, what does it take to be happy? And he equates it to abundance in certain types of things, abundance of friends, food, resources, different things like that, where abundance for other people is like, some people have got big cups and some people have tiny cups, and some people don't need a lot to feel full and have abundance and overflow. And think of it this way. So, if I got a cup right here, if I only fill it, a little bit right here, and it's fitting, I got a Game of Thrones cup here, talking about that. But if I only fill it a certain amount, doesn't matter relative, I'm still lacking. So I may be talking about abundance, I'm trying to get there. But other people, their cups are overflowing. And so here's the secret for everybody out there who wants to live this and how this affects us. Shrink your cup. So if you have these huge expectations that you're going to live this amazing life, and you're supposed to drive Ferraris and everything that social media tells you, your cup is going to be huge. You're going to spend all this time, and guess what? You're going to be talking about abundance, 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 because you're trying to fill it up. Well, let me tell you something. If you got a small shot glass, meaning your expectations are low, you understand contentment, you've got your core relationships that fill you up, any extra that comes is going to overflow on other people. And then you get the joy of helping other people. Now you really feel abundant. And so the overflow is that fulfillment. So you become full and filled, and helping other people is a sense of abundance that a lot of people can describe. And so, quite frankly, most people I know who are living the most abundant lives never talk about abundance or fulfillment. They're too busy going out and inspiring people and touching people and doing all those things that they're not saying all the stuff that you would naturally or normally hear from other people in these echo chambers out there. So that's a good place to start. You've asked a pretty broad question about human nature, but just tackling that abundance concept, it's one way that we can look at it. And it takes emotional intelligence to know the size of our cup and to know how we can shrink it, what have you. And that's just, again, a place that we can all start.
I absolutely love that, and the way you put that into, shrink your cup, and where I'll take it from here. And then we're going to dive into the EQ economy that you've actually built. But going back to the cup quickly, how I see that is really identifying the need versus want. And a lot of people live in a want mentality. And so they have these massive cups filled with Lamborghinis and Ferraris and mansions and billion-dollar bank accounts. But the actual truth of the matter is that's not addressing the need. And when we actually shrink the cup, we're shrinking it down to identify maybe more so what we need and less of what we want.
Absolutely. And now I'm not taking away, there are some people who are designed that they need to make gads of money. They're just wired that way. I've met them, and I encourage them to make as much money as they possibly can. Now, what you do with that money is a completely different scenario. So we're not going to go there. But I find some of the most generous people, the wealthiest people, and resources naturally flow to them because they are so generous. It doesn't take much for them to be fulfilled. So if you look at, some people who go out and they are the most generous and the wealthiest, they live so lean because they're just satisfied with those small things. But if you have someone that, for them, again, it's that complex psychological conditioning. You might grow up and you might have spent some time with your father racing cars or building cars, and you might want to go out and just blow all your money on that nice, awesome Lamborghini. I'm going to support that. If it fills you and it's something that comes from within, not from external. So these are the extrinsic motivators that we want to avoid, which scientifically are proven actually be contradictory or detrimental to your overall mental health and well-being. But if there's something internal and that's just something that you need, it's just an emotional part of you, I'm all for it. And so you're right. And I don't want this to go and all of a sudden we start bashing rich people. Not about that. We need billionaires. I'm sorry, we do. Okay, we need billionaires. It's just naturally going to happen. We will not be able to avoid wealthy people in the world. What we can avoid is this tension and this polarization of people, and where we virtually eliminate the middle, and it's either mega top 0.1% or the bottom, the rest of us. We can actually, create some equity in the middle there that I believe will flow and trickle down. And so I just want to avoid us, bashing people with Lamborghinis. If that was a need that I have, I'd go buy a Lamborghini. I just don't have that need. And I'm self-aware enough to know, is that a need or is that a want? Do I want to flex on social media for everybody? Or is this something I need? And there are people who enjoy very opulent lifestyles very secretly, and they just enjoy those things, and they're not flexing and they're not making other people feel bad because they empathize with what other people would say or think or experience if they were exposed to that. So I support it all. I'm pretty open.
And you've proven to be, and I think that's one of the things I've always appreciated is just, you've got your views and your belief system that you stand behind. But of course, part of the emotional intelligence piece is being able to look at it from the other side and accept them for them. So I appreciate that. Let's jump into the EQ economy that you're currently building right now.
Sure.
You've set up an organization. How are you building the EQ economy, leveraging people's intrinsic needs for everybody to kind of, as you mentioned, kind of come together and be successful, prosperous? I didn't use your words there, but paraphrasing. So yeah, what are you doing? How are you putting this all together?
Okay. Well, it starts with my life. So for me, it's important that I model the things that I want to live. I want to live and I want to see in the world. It's that cliche quote by this time, be the change that you want to see, be the EQ economy, be the emotional intelligence that you want to see in the rest of the world. And so I came back from China 2019 in December, right before everything just went crazy, and had to rebuild what I had, which was threatened after 18 months of being in China. And I was training emotional intelligence, and I was consulting, and I was partnering with different organizations, and we had to retool. And so now we create this sort of ecosystem that's happened that's all the way to China. And I'm known as the emotional intelligence consultant, trainer, teacher for some pretty large companies, and I'm not going to name drop, but pretty big. I've been in some pretty big boardrooms. And so I'm requested to talk on the brain science, emotional intelligence. So I actually make money teaching emotional intelligence because it's being identified as something in China for a need. And I talk about empathy and what have you. And then I've got certain things. And like I have a gentleman on my payroll, and nobody in China is going to be able to watch this because Facebook and everything is all blocked, and YouTube and all the social media. But I have a gentleman on my payroll in China, and I pay him pretty much double what he would make over there, just to be my assistant and he has a very nice lifestyle, and he's always nervous. He always thinks something's wrong, and he's like, what can I keep doing for you? And I'm like, you're doing fine. And he had a very difficult time, got stuck in Wuhan, and I just have him on the payroll there. And he has assisted me strategically. So it's about his value, not what he could command in that spot. So I'm going to live this. And so now we're taking these opportunities, and I'm taking what I've learned and I'm sharing them with other entrepreneurs here and people who want to be tutors, coaches, consultants using emotional intelligence. So then the goal is train them to understand and have self-awareness, self-regulation, social emotional responsibility, self-concept, self-compassion, empathy, all those different skills, and then find out what they want to do when it comes to business, what bubbles up, what they need to do versus what opportunities they have, and let's analyze and explore, and then teach people these frameworks on how to go out and actually generate income. But it's not just go do what you're passionate about. I know lots of people who want to be part of what I call the passion economy. And I find the passion economy is different than the EQ economy, because passion economy is just, I want to do what I want and I want to change the world, which is really important. But the EQ economy also understands how do we handle the tough times when it comes to being an entrepreneur, the hard work, the suffering, being punched in the face every day when you're trying to do a startup and going into the marketplace, what have you. So what we're trying to do is build like a constellation. For me, it's this network of entrepreneurs who are going to live by these values, be as emotionally intelligent leaders and business managers, and then slowly start to network these pieces together and then see how they interact. There's no rules. We're not taxing people. We're not doing anything like that. We believe in a righteous value exchange. Let's do business together in an emotionally intelligent way and see where it takes us. It's a big experiment. Like, it could be absolutely fantastic, could provide, businesses and professions and advancement of careers, as well as jobs and stability for a whole bunch of people. Or we could be, 5 years from now going, what happened? And it was a bum experiment.
And so just quickly, what are maybe like one or two things, positive things that you've seen in a very short period of time that has kind of like piqued your interest and say, this might actually have some real promise or merit in what you're doing?
Absolutely. Well, first thing is, when someone learns emotional intelligence, so here's my theory, is that there's so much technical information out there. You can throw a rock and take a course, and a lot of it is really good. Some of it, they're just taking advantage of you. Unfortunately, there's the dark side of this, where someone can socially engineer how desperate you are emotionally and get you to, buy into that course and start paying money on credit cards and, all these things, go into debt to, try and get there. But then I've seen people who deal with the emotional blockages that are preventing them from being successful as entrepreneurs and accelerating their ability to go to market and start generating money as soon as you deal with that. So I would say that's one of the most exciting things. Remember, definition for us of emotional intelligence is how intelligent are you of your emotions, about your emotions, and how to use those emotions to unlock your intelligence. So making people emotionally intelligent about their emotions, so someone can say, wait a second, I'm feeling this. Where's this coming from? I grew up this way. I get triggered, or I'm insecure about this. It makes no rational sense, but this is what I'm dealing with internally. They resolve that. Their ability to learn the technical stuff and to go be successful. It's amazing how fast we've been able to launch people and get them going with just some emotional intelligence coaching. Now, remember, I'm not an expert in everybody's business, but they already have the technical expertise. It's the emotional blockages that are holding them back. And once we resolve those, I'm watching people just poof, like bloom and flourish right before my eyes. And that's probably the most gratifying thing that I see, is that we've dealt with the emotional block and now we're seeing the results. It's
absolutely phenomenal. And I can provide a testimonial to that, and just the impacts of unlocking those emotional ties to past behaviors or current behaviors, but how effective that really is. So one, thank you for everything that you shared and what you're doing. It's absolutely phenomenal. It's amazing to work beside you. How do people get engaged with this, Ed? Like, if people want to learn more about the EQ economy, or even just become more aware of their own emotions, what's the first step that people need to take?
Sure. Well, everybody's going to have their different pathways, right? And ultimately, you have to understand that the EQ economy really is a community. It's just a community that's taking responsibility for the economics of that community, not just saying, hey, we're just going to lean on each other and, but everybody goes off into their own separate lives. We get involved, right? So you can't just have a bad day and come and then share, I got to get this off my chest, or I feel bad, or I feel like a loser, and these things, and get encouragement. You are also going to be asked, what are you doing for your work? So I'll ask some very personal questions, and just talking about money can bring all that up to the surface. So how are you generating money? I'm going to be very direct with those things. And so it's all about, okay, let's get around people that we have joy with. And that's some of the things that we teach about joy, the feeling of being glad to be with one another. So I feel glad to be with these people in my strength and weakness. And then it's about hearing the truth without making it good, bad, or scary. So not getting all riled up when someone tells you the truth and says you have a bad business idea, or you're poor in execution, or, you're going to run out of money, like, get your head out of the clouds type thing. A vision is one thing. Without execution, it just becomes a daydream. So it all becomes about, okay, get into the community and start learning, and then deal with your stuff. That's the first thing. So as we come in contact with each other, we're going to see, like, I trigger people in our community all the time. I get it. I see it. I understand, because I remind them of certain types of things, or I'll talk about certain things that create those complex emotional reactions. The key is, will you stay in that community and learn together and go through it, or are you going to run? And a lot of people have run. A lot of people have isolated themselves, and I totally have empathy, and I'm open. I have compassion for people like that. But the ones that have stayed in, even though it's hard, let's just get together. Let's talk about the really hard stuff, and let's suffer together and have joy with one another. That's really what it comes down to. And we're not the only game in town. We're not the only ones that can do this. But if you can get into a community and then start learning together emotional intelligence, things will emerge. It'll naturally start to happen, and you'll start to realize, okay, our community has this potential. I have this potential. We have found that the emergence of it is something that we don't touch. We just let it grow, and we don't try and control it. If we do that, we start to see some pretty cool things happen.
Absolutely phenomenal. And so what I'm hearing is join the community. Hit the link that's in the description. Request your 3XQ assessment. Get involved. Get into the community. Engage with any one of the folks that that we associate with from UEQ, or the now 3XQOS that's coming up. Ed, I promised I would ask this one question. I'm going to get out of here, and then I also just want to give a quick plug to your book, The Great Reset. Controversial. Some people think it's a conspiracy theory. We know that it is actively being discussed at the WEF. How does the EQ economy compare to something that is being proposed in the Great Reset?
Okay. It's a really great question. I'm glad you gave me some time telling me that you're going to ask this question. So for me, the biggest difference, and I'm not going to touch whether it's a conspiracy theory, all this stuff. I have a healthy, cautious approach. I'm healthy in a healthy skepticism towards different things, especially when it has to do with power. So when people in power start talking about change, when they don't need the change themselves and they talk about the rest of everybody changing, I start to go, okay, whether you call it conspiracy or not, I just say, let's just look at it for what it really is. But I would say the difference between the Great Reset and the EQ economy is the Great Reset is a result. It is something that they want to do. The EQ economy, to me, is a process. Okay, so let me define that. Result is a destination. We want a great reset. Let's reset everything. And what's going to happen, all the power, you throw all the chips up in the air, they're going to end up in someone's hands eventually. And how do you do that great reset? That's a real complex, sort of thing. And I can appreciate people talking about it. I know there are people who legitimately believe in it. I know there are people, some people call it the mission economy, right? So where are we living for, et cetera. But that's a result, a great reset. It's literally going in and pressing reset and then seeing an end result. And therefore, you have to control the outcome to get to that result. And every time you get into control and different things, that goes against human nature and our intrinsic needs. So then EQ economy, to me, is a process. How do we get in the basics, into the foundation, inject it, and allow something to occur? And if it looks like a great reset and it ends up at a great reset, so be it. But I'm not going to introduce power dynamics, and I'm not going to mandate that it's a certain way, or else I'm going to take a very authoritarian, position on it. I'm not going to mandate it. I'm just going to see. So let's inject emotional intelligence into this group of people, and let's see what the economy happens, and kind of, step back versus mandate it from some type of large organization, what have you. So to me, that's the difference. One is a result, the other is a process.
Awesome. Appreciate that perspective. And I'm just going to quickly pull this in here, Ed, and you can just give us quick update. Tell us about the book. I know you got another one coming, the Cortex Circuit. Tell us quickly, and we'll get you out of here.
So the book, I wrote this, throughout my time in China, after I had, a very difficult experience with isolation. And I know I had mental health challenges when I was in China, by myself. Began researching, and I came across something called the experience processing pathway in the brain, in the field of affective neuroscience. And so I began researching, cobbled a framework together, and I said, hey, how can we put this into a coaching framework? I started using it in China, it became pretty good, successful. We even started a company called Cortex out in China because of it. Came back, published it, and pretty much using it as a manual or a textbook to allow people to read everything that I'm teaching and understand. So if you read it, it has all the brain science and different parts of the brain and centers of the brain that undergird all the other stuff that I create and that I teach. So you just read it. It's a quick read, and it's designed to help you with understand the basics, fundamentals of the brain science and how the brain works when we're teaching all the other emotional intelligence stuff.
And you can pick this up on Amazon, pretty much anywhere, I think. Is that correct, Ed?
Yeah, Amazon is the way to go. You just pick it up. It's all on Amazon and Kindle in all the different markets around the world.
Awesome. Ed, man, I said 30 minutes. We've been 37. I know you're on a tight schedule. Very much appreciated. Let's get you out of here. We're going to keep doing this every week. Let's keep talking about the EQ economy and how we can deliver and really change the world and the current systems that we're built on. So, Ed, man, much appreciated.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.